This retrospective has been very good for me because, first of all, I think you might be well known in one place, but really rather unknown in another. For instance, I had never really shown in Los Angeles until I had this show of 170 works. And people will come up and say, well, I kind of hated your work, and, now that I've seen it, I'm getting to like it, And it's the fact of actually encountering the work physically, I think.
An art show that broke all attendance records at the Los Angeles Museum of Contemporary Art, as well as in Philadelphia and Denver. Now it's in Nashville, where Red Grooms and his artwork have come home for a few months. It's a show that draws viewers again and again, first to find out what it's all about, and then lures them inside some of the pieces themselves, into Grooms' version of a subway that vibrates like a real subway, into the Woolworth building with a dragon going through it, and to see a film in a Grooms painted and designed movie house called Tut's Fever. The 170 pieces in this show are vibrant, alive, and moving. Good art and fun for everybody.
There's something that happens. I think that I have been interested in this kind of physical communication through the work with people. People, but largely I don't know. I mean, you start out working for yourself and then your family and your peers, and then it slowly gets out of control, and basically you work for people you don't know at all.
Why are there so many pieces?
I'm interested in history and contemporary life, and there's just so much activity, so many things to deal with that it can't be small. It has to be big as far as I'm concerned.
How would you describe your style?
I guess the pop label best describes the larger environmental pieces, but then I've done more intimate works that were more about my family or close friends, or even portrait commissions that I've done are less pop-like. When it's taxi drivers or people ask me what I do and describe it, I say it's pop art. That's about the closest I can honestly describe it.
You've got the painting and the sculpture and the blown-up items and, name some other different styles that are all in this show.
My mother coined a phrase that still is used called the stick-out. She called my works, when they protruded from the wall, stick-outs. And then I, kind of as a joke, on the back of one piece, it's Mr. and Mrs. Rembrandt, I coined the word sculptopictorama. And that's being used widely now. And I really did it because I was using this term environmental art, which sounds so dull. And I was trying to think of something more colorful. I guess what I was really thinking of is a kind of diorama, tableau-like painted sculpture format.
You have these walk-through pieces also.
They're the pieces that particularly relate to the viewer. The viewer is actually either on it or walking through it or in it, or in the case of Tut's Fever, it's used as a movie theater, but it's also to be looked at.
Where do you get all these ideas?
Some of the ideas I first got at the Nashville Public Library. I was a big reader of books, and I would come and read about artists that later I would meet. For instance, the first artist I met in New York was Moses Sawyer, and he was surprised that a guy from Nashville would know who he was, but I knew all about him because I had read about his generation and knew about his brother Raphael and even his brother Isaac Sawyer. But basically that information I got from looking at picture books. You get a sort of pictorial library in your head that is one source of the visual look of your work.
Do you have a problem maybe focusing on one idea? It looks like you just have so much going around in your head all the time.
That's a really very good question. Yeah, sometimes I have a desperate problem there. I've been rather lucky with this retrospective. It's a thing that I've been involved with for about a month before each opening, and that sort of keeps me grounded. But I have had times when I wasn't sure, I get up in the morning not sure where I wanted to focus.
All of this began for Red Grooms in Nashville, where he was born, and where he received his early art training before he moved to New York in 1957. This Homecoming 86 Red Grooms retrospective show is at the Tennessee State Museum. In the next Tennessee Kaleidoscope program, an incident that marked the turning point and led to fame for Red Grooms. This program, made possible with the joint support of the National Endowment for the Arts, the Tennessee Arts Commission, and the WPLN Educational Foundation. This is Lynn Folk.
I had not been able to meet people in New York at first, especially people of my own age. And the turning point, as I remembered, I was walking in the 10th Street area, and that used to be in the 50s the big hangout for artists. And I saw a bum on the street who looked like he was staggering or had hurt himself or something. And I was trying to be a good Samaritan, and I finally realized that he was hopeless. And just a moment later, I ran into a group of people in an art gallery that were opening a gallery.
That marked a turning point in the career of internationally known artist Red Grooms, whose Homecoming '86 retrospective show is at the Tennessee State Museum. This is Lynn Folk for Tennessee Kaleidoscope, as we talked about his show, which is so big that 10 trucks were needed to transport it. His art pieces, many of them done in what he calls sculpto-picturamic style, and his pop art paintings and other works are full of puns. He often refers to them as tall tales, making it fun for himself and the spectators because he thinks we all take our art too seriously at times. When Red Grooms went to New York in 1957, he struggled through some difficult times. Then he had this experience, first with the bum on the street, and then making friends in the art gallery.
As I remember it, meeting that bum, and then the next thing I knew, I had made friends, and I was in this art gallery. And one of the guys that I met there was Jay Milder. He was a young guy of about my age, and he had just recently arrived in New York from Omaha, Nebraska. But he was a terrific catalyst. He knew everybody. He took to the city just so easily, and we became great friends. And before you knew it, we opened up an art gallery ourselves called the City Gallery. And from that experience, I was meeting more and more people. And that was kind of it. I certainly wasn't famous at that time, but I did feel like I was beginning to make some contacts and getting response to what I was doing.
In something I read about you, a quotation, you said that your work is like tall tales of people and things and places.
I like the storytelling possibilities of art making. That's really fun. And I think in the work it's pretty organic and it's pretty spontaneous, and it has a little bit of that spinning a yarn business about it. Well, some people call it imagination, but I think it's just a sort of library full of visual puns and cliches. You know, if you want to make a snowman, the artist knows how a conventional snowman looks. I mean, that's what an artist's supposed to do. You know how it's supposed to look to everybody. And I think that that's good, and that you can relate to a lot of people through that. But then you can play with them, you can pun with them, and create sort of tall tales with those images.
That's really the art of it, being able to do that.
Yeah, and people think, then they sort of think the artist is naive and just doesn't know what they're doing. I guess the real point is whether it rings true or not. You can do anything you want as long as it rings true, and that's an actual criteria that can't be denied.
I want to ask you about some of your future plans. I did read that you are working on a children's book of some kind.
Yes, it's just coming out this fall. The author is Mark Strand. This is my first job as an illustrator. I originally wanted to be an illustrator. I finally got a job doing it. And it's a great story called Rembrandt Takes a Walk, and that's published by Clarkson Potter.
With the Rembrandt in there and all, is it involving art?
Yeah, it's kind of like, it's not really educational. Don't worry, kids. Buy the book. It's not educational. But, yeah, there's a little bit about art because the boy, Tom, who's the hero of the story, his uncle is an art collector, and Tom visits him, and a lot of interesting things happen, but eventually he makes contact with Rembrandt, who has the possibility to step out of the picture if Tom will help him. And then they take a walk together through the contemporary town and have adventures.
Red Grooms, whose retrospective art show is at the Tennessee State Museum. This program, Tennessee Kaleidoscope, made possible by the National Endowment for the Arts, the Tennessee Arts Commission, and the WPLN Foundation. This is Lynn Folk.
You know, back then, they didn't have no asphalt roads. You know, it all would be a dirt road. Now, I'd have a big thing of wire. I'm going down the road dragging it, going home with it, making up a big dust. Some people come out and say, stop making all that dust. I'd have a big thing of wire going down the road pulling it, carrying it home to make something. And my daddy used to get at me about, I'd be having a big bowl of wire or something down there. He'd come stumble over it and everything. Yeah, you just got that wire laying around everywhere. Clean all that wire mess up.
All of that was many years ago when Vannoy Streeter of Shelbyville, as a young boy, became interested in making things out of wire. Then it was baling wire that he used. Now it's wire coat hangers. This is Lynn Folk for Tennessee Kaleidoscope, looking at horses, airplanes, cars, trucks, people, even Elvis Presley, all made by the wireman, Vannoy Streeter, who's seen often at festivals and fairs in Middle Tennessee, where his creations are on display, and from there they go all over the country. It all began with his wishing to have certain things that he saw in stores in Wartrace, the town where he was born.
Things that I wanted, some kind of toy, like farm equipment, and I would go to the store and look in the window and would see it. And then I'd just go back and get me some baling wire and make it.
Have you got some of those early pieces that you did then?
No, they all gone. I give them away and sold some of them.
So you've been doing this then a long time.
It's got to be 50-some odd years.
Well, is this your main work?
It was just started out as a hobby.
What was your job then?
My first job fooling with horses, Tennessee walking horses. I remember the first horse show it ever happened in Wartrace. And they didn't have no ring at the first horse show, just up and down the street. That was the first horse show, what they ever had. This first walking horse show was in Wartrace.
So that's when you really got interested in doing these sculpture pieces of the
Making
horses.
different horses and farm equipment.
Were you making all of these out of wire at that time?
Baling wire at that time.
And when did you start doing them out of the coat hangers then? Was
Well, since
afterward?
they done away with baling wire, then I started using coat hangers. See, they don't have no more baling wire now.
Well, they almost don't have coat hangers anymore either.
It's another kind of wire to use when they put up electric fence. I can use that, plus I use clothesline wire.
Do you spend all your time now doing this sculpture,
Most of
or do you still work like with the horses or something else?
No, but I go to a horse show, work at Celebration.
You have a booth where these things are for sale?
I don't have no booth. I carry a piece in my hand and just let somebody else out there sell it and set it up there and let them sell it for me.
Do you go out of state at all?
No, but a lot of my stuff is out of state. A lot of people out of state come here and pick it up. Doing the horse shows, you know, every state in the union is here then. They get it and carry it. Every state in the union got something. I got an airplane like that hanging up in New York.
So you do airplanes then,
I
in
do
addition to horses?
Anything with wire, I can do it that I've seen, or I can get a picture of.
Oh, you have to have a picture of it in order to do it?
Something that I ain't never seen before. Like you want something made, if I ain't never seen it, if you give me a picture of it, I can go from the picture.
Oh, I understand that you do a lot of trucks also.
All kind. Any kind of truck. Yeah, I got some in Texas at Peterbilt, and then I've got one in Detroit at the main office.
Peterbilt.
Yes, 18-wheeler.
Well, it must take a long time to do something like an 18-wheel truck.
Well, I can complete 1 2 days easy.
When you finish, do you spray these?
Generally, they're sprayed, but lots of people, you know, don't like things sprayed. A lot of people want it just natural, you know, to show the coat hanger. When I make these old Model T cars, they want it just, you know, like it is, with just plain old coat hanger.
Well, you must be the only person in the world that makes sculpture out of coat hangers.
Yes, only one is doing this. I just always knowed how to draw and make something out of wire. I've always known it.
Do you ever get tired of it?
No, the more I do it, more I like to do it. I like to think of something, you know, hard to do, something nobody else ain't ever done. I want something way out.
Famous Tennessee horses, mules and wagons, musical instruments, and a pair of false teeth. These are some of the sculpture pieces the wireman, Vannoy Streeter, has been asked to make from wire coat hangers. This program, Tennessee Kaleidoscope, made possible with the joint support of the National Endowment for the Arts, the Tennessee Arts Commission, and the HCA Foundation, the philanthropic arm of Hospital Corporation of America. This is Lynn Folk.
when I began the job here as director, we really started with nothing. There was nothing. The more usual way for university music archives to come into being is that someone will give or sell the university a collection, and then they'll try to figure out what to do with it. We're doing it the other way around. We're starting with the staff and the mechanism and no collection, and we'll be trying to build the collection. It's great for someone who likes to go out and buy books and records like I do. It just manages to let me satisfy all those sorts of desires.
Paul Wells, who in November of 1985 became director of the Center for Popular Music on the campus of Middle Tennessee State University in Murfreesboro. This is Lynn Folk for Tennessee Kaleidoscope at the MTSU newly formed Popular Music Center, which will be unique and useful and valuable as an archive and research center. It's going to be filled with old and new recordings, sheet music, books and articles concerning music of the people.
Well, we're one of the Centers of Excellence, which is the program sponsored by the Tennessee Higher Education Commission. It's a statewide program taking in both the University of Tennessee campuses and the campuses under the State Board of Regents systems, which would includes Middle Tennessee State, and includes East Tennessee State, Memphis State, Tennessee State in Nashville, Tennessee Tech in Cookeville, and many others throughout the state. And the way the centers are created, there has to be the initiative on the individual campuses to come up with a proposal, submit it before the State Board and before the Higher Education Commission, and the successful ones are approved and funded. A group of people on the MTSU campus got together and submitted the proposal, and once they had the funding in place and everything was approved, then they began the search for the director.
Is this something that's being done in other states, or will this particular center serve as a center for the whole nation eventually?
There isn't a similar centers program in any other state that I'm aware of. There are various other music archives attached to other campuses around the country. We are supposed to be doing something here that is unique, and I very much am trying to steer the growth of the collection in a way so that we don't duplicate existing public archives. The term popular music can take in everything from country to jazz to rock to whatever you want it to take in almost, but we're trying to guide the growth of the collection here, like I say, to not duplicate what exists in other places. Rutgers University in New Jersey has a fabulous jazz archive, and there's also a fabulous jazz archive at Tulane in New Orleans. UCLA has a large popular music collection, but it's primarily sheet music. They have something like 500,000 pieces of sheet music, but only a few thousand recordings. And ours will be a more balanced collection. Probably recordings for us will have a larger significance than sheet music, but I do want to have a balanced collection of all formats.
All this music is so closely involved with folklore.
It's another one of those strange quirks of academic tradition or academic history that people who have been involved in studying popular forms of music, a great number of them have come through the ranks as folklorists rather than as music people. Well, it was folklorists who were the first ones who began seriously studying country music, and likewise many people who develop an interest in other forms of pop music, whether blues or rock and roll or whatever, and even jazz, some in the early days, came up as folklorists.
Are you looking for things to be given to you, like somebody might hear this program and know of something? Would you want to have things donated to you, or, of course, subject to your approval?
Yes, certainly. In fact, we welcome donations, and I'm always happy to talk to people who have, collections. Many times I will talk to people who say, well, my grandfather had an old collection of 78s, or, my father had a great sheet music collection, and when he died, we didn't know what to do with it. And just this morning someone said that his uncle or someone, when the uncle passed away, they were going through the attic and they found the sheet music collection. They didn't know what to do with it, so they threw it out. By all means, since we are starting with nothing, I'm very open at this point to looking at just about anything.
Paul Wells, director of the Center for Popular Music at MTSU in Murfreesboro, has additional plans for concerts and a lecture series. There have been some of these already, and he wants to have a newspaper and public forum too, all of these concerning popular music. This program, Tennessee Kaleidoscope, made possible by the National Endowment for the Arts, the Tennessee Arts Commission, and the WPLN Educational Foundation. This is Lynn Folk.
Well, it was really interesting what was happening 30 years ago this month. Rockabilly was just exploding. I mean, Gene Vincent's first record was just coming out. Elvis Presley had, 2 #1 hits. Carl Perkins was doing real big. And Bluegrass was just starting to feel the impact of this. In fact, all of country music was really starting to feel the impact. Bill Monroe had 2 singles released that year, On, and I Believe in You, Darling. Don Reno and Red Smiley were doing very well, and they had out Limehouse Blues and Let's Live for Tonight.
Some of the records that Neil Rosenberg plays now on his radio show entitled 30 Years Ago This Month in St. John's, Newfoundland, and that he writes about for the magazine Bluegrass Unlimited. He sings in a bluegrass band. He's written the book, The Bill Monroe Discography, and his latest book is Bluegrass, A History. And most of all, Neil Rosenberg is considered to be America's leading authority on bluegrass music. When he lectured at the Center for Popular Music in Murfreesboro, I had a long conversation with him for Tennessee Kaleidoscope. We talked about his collection of old recordings and tapes, and how historically important it is for collectors to preserve all of this.
I think that as these people become a bit older and realize that the recordings they have some kind of historical value, that we'll see more and more of them in regular institutions. That's my hope. And I think that the music is really very well documented. If you compare bluegrass, say, with other forms, early jazz, stuff prior to the advent of recording. This is why bluegrass is interesting to study, even if you're not interested in, or you don't enjoy it as a music. It's a particularly well-documented form. You can go back and say, this is the original recording of a song, and this is the way things sounded in this year, you can follow it right through.
Could you tell me a little bit about your own collection? You must have thousands of records.
Well, I certainly have hundreds and hundreds. I stopped counting a while ago. I have lots of bluegrass LPs, but I suppose really more valuable to me are the tapes of live performances, of which I probably have about 300 or 400. These go back into the 1950s. They're interesting to me because a lot of things happen in live performance that don't happen on records. For example, as a folklorist, I'm interested in humor, and bluegrass comedy routines are real fascinating. And these things didn't get on record generally. What happened with them was that they were performed by the comedians on stage, and so the live tapes are really important for that sort of thing that's of interest to me.
How did you manage to get these?
During the period that I was doing my graduate work and working at Indiana University from 1961 to 68, I spent most of my spare time at a country music park in a little place called Bean Blossom, Indiana, that was owned by Bill Monroe. And whenever there was a bluegrass show there, especially by Bill Monroe, I'd be down there in the front with my tape recorder and a microphone up, on a stand right out there in front. So I recorded many, many shows there. And I met some local men who had started taping these shows just at about the time when tape recorders became available. So I was able to trade with them, or they loan me their tapes, and I built up my own library. Well, then I was in touch with people like this other places, and we traded. I'd say, listen, I've got Bill Monroe with Bill Keith and Del McCoury, and those are important names to the enthusiasts, and they'd say, well, that's great, I've got Red Allen and the Osborne brothers, let's make a trade. And we do this sort of swapping back and forth, and that's how these people build up their collections. And also I find now that people write me and they say, I've got a recording made at Bean Blossom in 1963 that I bet you'd enjoy listening to, and it's generally one that I made. And it's gone through many, many generations, of copying.
Neil Rosenberg, professor of folklore and director of the Folklore and Language Archive at Memorial University of Newfoundland. He comes to Middle Tennessee often to lecture and to do research. This program, Tennessee Kaleidoscope, made possible with the joint support of the National Endowment for the Arts, the Tennessee Arts Commission, and the WPLN Educational Foundation. This is Lynn Folk. me what we've been listening to.
You've been listening to a Regina music box playing a metal disc record, and the name of that tune was, I guess, one of the best sellers of the 1880s called Whistling Rufus. No one ever heard of it, I thought, in my life, except I was taking a tour through here one day and played it, and an elderly lady said, "Why, I haven't heard that tune in years. Why, that's Whistling Rufus."
Whistling Rufus and that music box make up only a small portion of what there is to see and hear at the Houston Museum in Chattanooga. This is Lynn Folk with Tennessee Kaleidoscope inside the museum house, where every window is filled with shelves of priceless, rare glassware, where the light filters through the various colors into rooms filled with more glass, china, and furniture. But space is limited in the Houston, so many of the glass pictures hang from the ceilings in several rooms, as museum director Tom Garner tells the story of Anna Houston, sometimes known as Antique Annie, and her dream.
There was a lady in Chattanooga who ran an antiques business, and she accumulated an enormous amount of everything: glass, furniture, textiles, guns, pictures, everything you can think of that was used from the period of about 1820 to about 1920 in American homes. Mrs. Houston traveled around the country picking up things. She had a whole group of what were called pickers, people who went through the countryside, go up to an old house and say, "You have anything old you want to sell?" She did an enormous business with dealers in Pennsylvania and New York State and Ohio. And Mrs. Houston had a dream of setting up a museum. She wanted to leave a lot of this stuff that she had collected for the benefit of future generations. A lot of it is not what you'd think of as museum quality when you start looking at 18th century furniture in the Metropolitan Museum, but it is museum quality in the sense it's what our ancestors used in their everyday lives. And I think for that reason even more interesting to people today who, being so mobile, and grandma and grandpa are dead and gone and the stuff's dispersed and you don't see it anymore in a lot of people's houses. And she petitioned the state legislature for a charter to establish a museum in 1949. She received it, and she died in 1951, leaving a board of trustees but no money to set up the museum. And for a number of years, her collection sat moldering away in this old building that she had lived in. And then the trustees finally decided they had to act, and they had sales of a lot of the furniture and some duplicate stuff and so forth, odds and ends, to get the money to start this museum.
And are all the items in this collection hers?
What you see is what Miss Houston had. And it's mind-boggling because what is out on display is only about a half of what we have because of space limitations.
I see this beautiful colored glass.
Well, what you're looking at in the windows in this front parlor are pictures. She had a thing about pictures, and at one point in her collecting career, she estimated she had accumulated some 15,000 pictures of all shapes and sizes. And while we don't have all 15,000, there still must be 3,000 to 5,000 of them in this house.
Is each one different?
There may be a few duplicates, but unlikely. I guess this little museum holds at least the best collection of American decorative art in the whole Southeast. We can hold our own against most any museum in the United States in the field of American glass. Now, we are not in the league of the great Corning collection in Corning, New York, or the Toledo Museum, but I'd put us up against anybody else for the breadth and the depth of this collection. Ms. Houston really scoured the countryside, securing examples of near everything. If you go upstairs into the press glass room, there are over 500 different patterns of pressed glass in that room alone. You only skim the surface when you go through here once or twice. There's more in the attic and in the basement than you can imagine.
Tom Garner, director of the Houston Museum on High Street in Chattanooga. This program, Tennessee Kaleidoscope, made possible with the joint support of the National Endowment for the Arts, the Tennessee Arts Commission, and the WPLN Foundation. This is Lynn Folk.
When you do the vocal backing on those records, of course, you get credit for it. Most of the time, it's either on the album or on the single record itself. Vocal group, the Jordanaires. Well, we've been on more recordings than any other vocal group in the world, and reason being is we've had the good fortune of working with all of the many great recording artists, and we've thoroughly enjoyed it.
The Jordanaires are well known to radio and record listeners, familiar to TV and film audiences also, because they've been singing backup for at least 30 years. This is Lynn Folk for Tennessee Kaleidoscope with Gordon Stoker, who sings first tenor in this award-winning quartet. The Jordanaires did the backup vocals for Elvis Presley for 15 years, beginning with his first hit in 1956. They arranged the music for all of the Elvis movies and were seen and heard in many of them. They've done films with other stars also, and appeared on the big TV network shows with stars like Eddie Arnold, Arthur Godfrey Talent Show, Johnny Carson, Tennessee Ernie Ford, Frank Sinatra, Milton Berle, Ed Sullivan, Steve Allen, Steve Lawrence. And for many years they run the Grand Ole Opry. But even though their voices have been heard on some 30 to 50 million records sold each year, they've never had a hit record of their own.
We've had one or two that's been in the top 10, but we never really tried to have hit records because we knew that if we had a hit record, it would take us out of the background field. We were told many, many years ago from Lee Gillette of Capitol Records, he said, boys, if you want to stay in the background field doing vocal backing on records will be good to you if you stay in it. If you have a hit record, it'll take you out of it. You have to go on the road and promote that record. You have to go on the road and constantly play dates to promote it. And if you want to stay at home with your families, stay in the background field and it'll be good to you. And you believe he gave me that information some 25 or 30 years ago, and believe me, he was so right.
Has all this recording been done here in Nashville?
No. A lot of recording that we do is on the coast, and in some recordings done in New York. But the biggest majority of it has been done here in Nashville. We actually were the most sought-after vocal group in the world for about, I'd say, 20 years. By that I mean we did anywhere from 3 to 4 recording sessions a day, 5 to 6 days a week. A lot of people will ask us, didn't your voice get tired? And yes, we had substitutes. Actually, the Jordanaires are made up of 4 male singers, and a lot of times we had women's voices. We used women's voices in with us on many, many recordings. But the Jordanaires are made up of 4 male voices, and then when one guy takes a vacation or something, we bring in a substitute. And we've also had all the good fortune of being the same personnel since the early 50s. And Ray Walker is the bass singer, Neil Matthews is the second tenor singer, and Hart Hawkins was with us till about 3 years ago, and he passed away 3 years ago. And he sang the baritone, and I'm Gordon Stoker, and I sing the first tenor. But, of course, we had a substitute that filled in for Hart for some 15 years when he would take his vacations and when he would take a leave of anything like that. And so when Hart passed away, well, we just continued to use his substitute.
Are you all from Nashville?
Only one of us was born in Nashville. Shall we say we're all from Tennessee, but only one, Neil Matthews, was the only voice part that was born in Nashville. I'm from West Tennessee, and the other guys from West Tennessee.
How did you happen to get together? And tell me a little of the history of the Jordanaires.
We kind of grew up together, and we grew up more or less to singing. We started singing at a very early age, kind of together, that type of thing. Hart Hawkins and I did, and then Neil Matthews started singing with us, and just one thing led to another, and before we knew it, we was forming a quartet, and before we knew it was in demand to sing, and we started singing. We won the Grand Ole Opry 13 years. We joined the Grand Ole Opry in about 1951 or 52, somewhere along in there. And then we did TV shows with Eddie Arnold, and we've just had a great, fantastic career. We've thoroughly enjoyed it.
If you were all from different places, how did you happen to get together and start singing together?
We were all living in Nashville. I came to Nashville to go to school, and the others more or less did the same thing. From that way, we got together and started singing.
What about awards that you've received?
We've had several different awards, but we don't really think of it that way. We just enjoyed singing, and we were thankful that we got to sing with all the big names in the recording business.
Big names that hold special memories for Gordon Stoker and the Jordanaires. Names like Elvis Presley, Marty Robbins, Buddy Holly, Jim Reeves, Patsy Cline, Rick Nelson. And after 30 years, the Jordanaires are still singing with top recording artists. This program, Tennessee Kaleidoscope, made possible with the joint support of the National Endowment for the Arts, the Tennessee Arts Commission, and the WPLN Educational Foundation. This is Lynn Folk.